cloud, and then I have to get us onto the right place on Facebook.
I will let you know. Hang on.
Oh, will you? Oh, that's amazing. So I can avoid the jibber jabber I usually do. I usually spend 2 minutes live, Liz, saying, am I where I'm supposed to be? And so the first 2 minutes of the conversation are me jabbering. Okay.
Nothing yet. Hold on.
I'm going to wait for Lisa's okay.
I think it's there.
Yeah.
Yes, you're on.
Brilliant. Good morning, everybody. Friday morning, we've come to the end of our annual event week, and I'm really delighted to have our final session with Liz Mills from Surrey County Council. Liz has very graciously and possibly bravely accepted to come on here live without really knowing what's going to come out of my head. Liz, hi and welcome. Can I ask you maybe to introduce yourself to people who might not know who you are?
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks very much for inviting me to be here with you this morning at the end of what has been obviously a really busy and fantastic week for everybody. My name's Liz Mills. I'm the Director for Education and Lifelong Learning for Surrey County Council, and one of my key responsibilities is to lead on special educational needs and disabilities and work with our partners and our families in order to be able to make sure that every child and their family are getting absolutely the right support that they need for their child. And I also have responsibility more broadly for education and the quality of education right through from 0 to 99 plus. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
It's really interesting that you bring up the 99 plus, because quite a lot of the work we do at the moment is focused on that transition to adult life, and we did some work, didn't we, this year on the autism strategy, and one of the biggest questions was, should we have a children's strategy and an adult one? And I think most of us were really passionate about the fact that it should be the whole life, because you're on one individual, aren't you, as you grow, and moving into those services can be really challenging if there is a really big break between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think taking an all-age approach feels absolutely right in all of the things we're thinking about. So right from the off, through early years, and in fact actually often pre-birth, thinking about doing everything we can really with adulthood and independence and preparation for that in mind. And I think if we take that approach and we take a more seamless sort of approach to that journey through childhood into adulthood, then I think actually we do achieve a much better outcome as a result for people, and hopefully no kind of cliff edges, none of those jarring experiences that we know exist still through transition periods, which can be a really difficult time. So an all-age approach really helps us to start to smooth all of that out and really think about things differently.
Yeah. So we did a little bit of prep for this conversation, didn't we? And a little bit of structure. And what we were thinking, if we'd had a live event, this would have been part of our AGM, and we would have been talking about how the Parent Carer Forum, Family Voice Surrey, what our role is and how we interact with you, because us on our own, we don't exist without the partnership, do we? But I think it would be really interesting to have a bit of a chat so that people understand how we work together as a couple of organisations. We did a big piece of work, didn't we, in 2019 to, I suppose, reset and think about what that relationship should be looking like. Mm. And then we've had the most interesting couple of years.
Yeah, interesting would be one word. Challenging or difficult might be two other words. And it is really important to reflect on the period of time that everybody's been through and is still going through, both collectively as a community, but also individually. And I don't think it can be underestimated the impact that the pandemic has had on top of what are already often very complex issues and arrangements that need to be made for children and families. And so I'm really conscious of that and the impact that the pandemic has had and continues to have. But when we throw our minds back pre-pandemic, absolutely, I think we had a recognition together that we really needed to come together as people, yes, and
Yes.
also within our organisations to really talk openly and frankly about what was important, what was needed. And I think one of the things that Family Voice does for us is to be able to speak really plainly about experiences, both good and bad. So it's important for us to understand what's working so that we can do more of it, but also to really shine a light on those aspects which need our attention, to need us to work together differently, and then taking a much more co-productive and a different approach to being able to do the work. And I think that's the shift I can see in our work together over that time period, and that I do think is very much more embedded in the way in which we do things now.
We've certainly, we had I was really struck by the fact that we sit on the Sense System Partnership Board, don't we? And frequently I will have a meeting either with you or with somebody else to say, we're going to be talking about this. So Family Voice is included before it even gets onto the agenda at times, which I think has been a really big shift. I'm also really aware of the fact that we've been building these relationships, so we know you really well as people. And one of the hardest parts of our job, I think, is to put the difficult things on the table, because it's important to move forward, that we look at the positives and build on them. But at the same time, one of the things that we have to do is say, yep, that's great. However, these are the stories we're hearing, and they must be heard, however hard that is. And to try and do that in a way that challenges appropriately without damaging a relationship so that we can keep moving forward can be really difficult.
Yeah, I can see how that's really difficult. And yet, I think what you've been able to do is to bring those stories forward. And we describe them as stories, and of course they are people's real lives, but the way in which you are able to use their experiences to be able to shine a light, not just on their experience, but also this as an illustration of wider experiences of others, actually enables us to do much more informed work. And that's the important role that the Parent Carer Forum and Family Voice Surrey plays for us, because of course you are in touch with families deliberately and intentionally in a way in which, often we will not be. My daily life, doesn't bring me into contact in the same way. And that's not to say that I don't have conversations with families, of course I do, but you will be much more involved in a way in which we could not be, and also trusted in a way which enables sharing, which I think gives us a greater depth of understanding. So making time to be able to have that conversation is important. It's
very interesting that I would say the majority of parents who come to us with their stories ask to be kept anonymous, because they are often in really vulnerable places, or they're trying to manage a situation where the relationships they've got around their child can be really fraught. And the idea that gets out a little bit further can be really frightening. So a lot of what we do is anonymous. It can be really difficult sometimes. I know we will bring you stories and the questions you want to try and address them, we can't necessarily share with you. So that can be difficult, which is why we often kind of try and collect as many stories as possible to say this is a theme that we're seeing. And we've talked, haven't we, about how do we better give you a scale of what's happening, and also where, because we know that depending on where you are in Surrey, your experience might be slightly different. And it's something we're grappling with at Family Voices. How do we gather that information while still maintaining parents' confidentiality, and at the same time understanding that for you to make change, that level of information can be really critical.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we must respect people's confidentiality. We'd all expect that, as citizens and individuals, and that's really important. And yet finding a way to be able to draw that picture together is vital to our improvement work. And it really makes a difference. I know how much work Family Voice have been doing, and you've been doing, to extend the network, and thinking about our work with Surrey Youth Focus and all of those things has been really, important in terms of making sure we're really hearing kind of the breadth of experience and the themes and the issues that are really live for families. And And of course, we'll make change, and it's really important when we make change to know whether it's making a difference or not, or whether, you know, if we've made a new provision for children, whether that's, you know, been well received or not. And actually, you'll be able to talk to us and gather information about experiences, which are really helpful to know whether we should be doing more of those things or whether we should be adapting and changing. And that plan do review should apply to everything. You know, it's not just an individual child or their plan, it's about everything that we should be engaged in. So yeah, that's important, as well as us speaking, of course, to schools and settings themselves and all of the other ways in which we try to make sure that we're understanding what's happening for children.
You were saying earlier about the fact that, you know, we're able to speak to parents in a way that you as professionals aren't, and that's because we are parent carers. We are, you know, when you come to a Family Voice event, if it's, you know, if it was in the real world, it might be in a coffee shop, or it might be at a youth centre, it might be in someone's living room potentially. And suddenly, if you come to one event, I will offer you a cup of tea and say, how are you doing today? And we are all in the same thing. And very quickly, we realize that we're talking to someone who absolutely gets it. What I found recently really, really quite moving, we had Susan Harris and Tom Moore, who work for the council, for those of you who don't know. They came to a Family Voice event a few weeks ago to present the autism strategy. And I had a lovely meeting with Susan. Susan is the lead educational psychologist and the most lovely, wonderful lady who is passionate about children and really gets it. And in meetings we've had, I know she gets it. And yet she came away from that meeting, she said, you know, that's taught me I need to spend more time talking to parents. I thought I really got it, but I need to spend more time hearing them, because it just gives a different dimension. And that's one of the things I think we're trying to do at Family Voice is say to you and your colleagues, come and join us, come and talk to parents. Now, we have an absolute policy of respect and kindness, and we will not let parents get beaten up, nor will we let practitioners or professionals get beaten up, because that's not what we do. But I think there's something really eye-opening about just spending time in the company of people who are doing to quote one of our speakers this week, a magnificent and brave job. That was Catherine Hollins, actually. We have a community of magnificent parents, and I think hearing from them it gives you all that little impetus that you know why you're doing your job, don't you? You're there to help children. The other thing that you mentioned sorry, I will stop talking and let you talk, but you talked about our collaboration with organisations like Surrey Youth Focus, and that's been really key, I think, to our development as well. We talk much more than we used to about making sure that children and young people's voices are heard. And that used to be in conflict with parent voices in some way. I think my feeling is that's changing, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think you're right. I think there's much more of a sort of a coming together. And it is, of course, really important that we hear from individuals as well as communities and collective groups. And so one of the things that, you know, we must never do is just globalize experience, because of course it can be very different in different, you know, for different families, different people. But I think the networking has enabled us to see where those similarities lie, and the common areas that we really need to be focused on in order to maximise our impact for everybody. So I'm really, really pleased about the way in which that has been coming together, because I just think it's so powerful, and you've really been able to demonstrate that through the networks that you've been creating. And I think the other thing that has been a really important move, and that we must now really build upon, in terms of, you know, just thinking about Susan's comments there. And I'm really lucky to have Susan in our team and working for us as a local authority. She's really doing a tremendous job. But the district and borough networks that you've set up actually provide a really fantastic forum for that. So actually, you know, if we were thinking about this, you know, as something that we should be just routinely embedding, you know, how do we just hear and keep in touch with those experiences, rather than just thinking about it in terms of a project or something that we're specifically doing. and just keeping our minds open to that, and to make time for that. I think that's one of the other important ways in which we might be able to do more here.
Absolutely. One of the things we were going to talk about, so I suppose I'm backtracking a little bit, but we mentioned briefly COVID and how that has turned our lives upside down, and I think there's been such a juxtaposition of different facets. You know, our community has undoubtedly struggled more than most, and at the same time we've seen people in the mainstream world living a life that is much closer to ours. And so there's almost, I think, been a recognition to some extent that isolation is really difficult, and that we need people, we need support networks, and those of us who've got disabled children often find that much harder. And then when we find those networks, we become very necessarily reliant on them. And I suppose one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you briefly is how you found yourself plunged from a local authority perspective into this crisis and emergency. And I remember really vividly thinking, when we went into lockdown, I am going to leave Liz well alone. She's got a whole lot on her plate. But I think within a week, it was Barbara at the time, wasn't it? One of the assistant directors who'd contacted me. Yes. And I was wondering what was happening in your head at the time.
Wow. I mean, of course, it was a sort of situation that, you know, we were all plunged into. You know, to some degree, you know, you could sort of see what was coming, but I'm not sure any of us really anticipated how it would be when we, you know, heard the message about our lockdown arrangements and all of those factors. And immediately we wanted to sort of think about putting different arrangements in place so that we could work with those people that we really needed to be closely, you know, aligned with, to be able to make sure that we were able to be really flexible and dynamic and responding to the situation as it was developing and emerging. And one of the ways in which we did that, as you know, is sort of a weekly meeting at the time with Family Voice colleagues. And I was really grateful to Barbara Peacock, who was able to be able to lead that for us. But I think in doing that, we were able to think about the differing needs, and to be able to try and put in place arrangements that would respond appropriately and put the support in place. So often it was just about communication as well, and just understanding. So, you know, making sure that those things were really a priority for us, as well as making sure that the workforce was able to adapt and respond and think differently about how to carry on. And one of the things we very much tried to do was not to just put everything down. It would have been, you know, it would have been perhaps a natural response, but actually, I think by and large, we found a way to continue with all of the work that we had underway and make an appropriate response. And of course, there will be things that we could and should learn, that we could have done differently, that of course won't have reached everybody. And so I'm making those comments, knowing that in some respects it's never going to be enough, and it's certainly not going to be perfect in a sort of a pandemic period. But I do think we tried our best to make sure that we were hearing and really listening to the lives of our you know, our children and our families, where perhaps they have a child with additional needs, and, you know, making an appropriate kind of set of arrangements wherever we could. In part, it was just really difficult. I remember those times when, you know, families really needed to be able to get outside with their children much more, and just thinking about how we work with other agencies to make sure that they understood those needs and that could facilitate that time outside, and all of those things which just feel, you know, very alien to us almost even now, because we've moved again into a different place. But at the time, it was really hard and very difficult, and the lived experience was really important for us to understand, so that we could do the work that we needed to do.
And I think that I remember that being one of the earliest conversations, wasn't it? That in all of those rules, then there needed to be flexibility for disabled children to be able to go out and things like that. And I think there was an understanding and a response. The two bits of work that I remember particularly in that time was that conversation that we had with you as an authority to say, our families are really worried about their PAs. They can't have them in their houses because it's not safe. but if we can't pay them, we're going to lose them. And getting a PA, finding a PA is so difficult to start with. And I remember the conversations we had, and quite quickly the decision was made that actually we could keep our PAs employed, we could keep them, paying them at the same rate. And that was really, really helpful. And then a similar thing, so that was a kind of crisis response. And then at the same time, there was this just normal business as usual work around direct payments because the rates were changing. Yeah. And we had a whole piece of work around communication where there was a bit of a kerfuffle, but it was quite interesting that we were doing that crisis response and the day-to-day at the same time, and bumbling through sometimes, but at least we did keep things kept going, which they needed to, didn't they?
Yeah, it was vitally important that things kept moving forward. And of course, along that pathway, we've also managed to keep hold of all of actually the bigger transformation aspects. 290 additional school places, special school places came on in September. But actually, if we hadn't have kept our focus in those areas, that would have been delayed, and that would have made a big difference to every child and their family. And now in those places, and I'm hoping really benefiting from being able to be in those facilities. So it was really important for us to do both, and not to just sort of park or put down because of the pandemic, but just to really find a way of carrying on and adapting.
Can I ask a slightly less field? My brain is doing a curious question. In the new school, Foxgrove, that started, they weren't able to set up in the site that they'd anticipated, were they, initially?
No, so they've spent the first term on a temporary site.
And was that partly because of COVID kind of slowing things down? I'm just wondering whether it was not, and whether you had to find alternatives, because at the end of the day, the school opened, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It did. I'm not sure in that specific case. Actually, it was particularly linked to COVID, although maybe around the edges, some of that. But they just the development of the site, as sometimes happens, was just delayed, and we had to make a choice about did we want to lose the places, and there are over 70 places actually there this year being utilised. Did we want to lose those places for a further year, or did we want to find a way forward? And that's the great benefit of collaborating and trying to find a way through. And of course, we really pushed really hard to make sure that we were able to get that provision open. So there were and are still lots of impacts around COVID on our as there are for everybody, on supply chains and the ability to sort of do various things. But I think by and large, we've found ways of mitigating those issues in order to be able to continue that important sort of part of our work as well, and make sure that we'll be able to deliver all of those schemes on time, which is critical. That's the difference that we can make. So absolutely, every place that opens is a benefit.
Yeah, and I have to say, we've had some feedback from parents of that new school, and so far all of it has been really good, which is really lovely to hear.
That's really brilliant. Yeah, and I know the school will be delighted. I mean, they're really excited too about having been able to open it. It's opening a whole new school doesn't happen that often, and it is the first one that we've opened in quite a while that's been completely new. We've expanded some special schools, but it's been completely new for a little while. So it's been really exciting, I think, to be able to do that.
Great. I'm looking at the time, and I think we should probably move on to our next bit. The thing that I'm really I'm just, there's a fizz in me about this, and it's not something where we can yet say, yep, that life is changing for families in Surrey, but it shows for me the beginning of a real shift in culture within the local authority. And that's the Time for Kids principles and initiative, which I think part of the excitement for me is that this is something that's happened very much with Surrey Youth Focus as a bit of a lead, I think, isn't it? And for me, that shows for the last 2 or 3 years, a real change in the local authority. I never know whether it's the council or local authority. I know
both
this much.
Both are good.
But this openness towards working with others and hearing, we had a meeting a little while ago, and Kate from Surrey Youth Focus and I came back, and she sent me a little email and said, we make quite a tag team sometimes. But I think both of us in really different ways can be challenging, and we help steer things, I think, from that lived experience perspective. But the Time for Kids initiative for me has been really, really interesting to see. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what that is and how we use it?
Time for Kids is essentially a set of principles that we want to adopt for children, and it was born out, importantly, out of a set of conversations that we had about what are the things that children really should be able to rely upon in their lives, and we use those as almost conversation openers. They're things that we want to bring to mind, principles that we want to bring to mind in order to be able to frame the conversation. And in doing so, what it really does for us, I think, as a collective, is to be able to put children at the heart of that conversation in a very real way. So the way in which we typically do this is we now use these principles to start every conversation. And the principles themselves centre around connect and connection, trust, hope, belonging, and believing. And so we're really, really trying to bring those principles to mind. And we might do that by saying and asking everybody to think about just thinking about one of those principles in relation to a child or a family that they know, and to be able to think about what that means for them and what's resonating for them. And I was really struck, we did this with some corporate colleagues, actually. So I've also done this with the Department for Education. So every meeting that we start, we're thinking about this. And I did this with some corporate colleagues, and we were going to have a conversation. So it's with a land and property team. We were going to have a conversation about bricks and mortar and thinking about, the estate and the provision that we were making. And as a result of the conversation, we stopped thinking about that, actually. And the conversation then that we held was about, is this good enough for my child? What would this mean to me? And I was just so struck about the difference and the different type of conversations, because of course, most people that will be in the room with you, in fact, everybody in the room with you will know a child, have a child, they'll be a grandparent, or they'll be a neighbour. Everybody's got that focus and is able to really get in touch with that. And it really, these principles for me have been incredibly powerful about just making sure that the conversations that we're having are completely centered around those principles and what children really need and deserve.
Well, what's really interesting, particularly about the example that you share, is what then happens is that people's thinking changes. And if people's thinking changes, then the decisions they make are changed. And that's what we're all trying to do. We're in the whole purpose, I think, of parent care reforms originally was to inject that this is what it feels like, this is what it is to live this life, this is what we need, what our children need, yes. And to change that thinking. And I think this initiative around Time for Kids is probably the most powerful thing I've seen since I've been, dotted about Family Voice, because it is changing thinking. And what I find really interesting is we are at risk sometimes of being a bit self-congratulatory, aren't we? When we get into these meetings and we say, what are we doing well? And I've, because I am a parent carer, and I can't remember if you've met my three darlings, Liz. You've met some of them.
I have, yes. More than once, actually.
More than once. But I find myself in those meetings, there's usually a crisis that's going on in my life one way or another. And so my mind often will go to something that's not easy. And whereas I hear, I'm thinking about this happened that was really good, I'll come and go, yeah, my child doesn't belong anywhere.
Oh.
But it offers a safe place in which to put that more difficult part of the story, doesn't it? And it's usually, I have to say, I'm really grateful that it's so far always been very well received and accepted that, yeah, this is really hard to hear, but is important to hear.
It's really important to hear, and I feel like you do, a sense that the Time for Kids principles is creating a cultural shift, and
Yeah.
I think that's the thing all the time that we're thinking about, and we'd want every one of our practitioners, all of our staff, to be thinking about is the quality of the relationship and the conversation and the work that we're doing together. And the Time for Kids principles really helps us to focus routinely back into that really important domain, and just frame the conversation in a completely different way. So I think it's been a really important step change for us all, and I'm just so delighted that it's sort of spread out so far.
That because the police use it as well. I think they've called
and
it
health
something
colleagues,
slightly, yes, it's all over the place.
The
other thing that I'm really interested in that is that we've talked for a long time among systems about the idea of co-production, and I think it's probably fair to say that for a long time it was a little bit of a tick box exercise. That does feel like it's changing, but one of the things I really love about the Time for Kids is it means we are beginning to talk about not only co-production as an organisation on a strategic level, but actually that co-production should be happening with every single child and every single family.
Yes.
And that for me is the goal, isn't it? It's every family's journey should be individualized.
It should be at that individual level, and of course, it should be at that sort of that strategic level as well. So right through end to end, as a sort of an approach to the work that we do. And we've been talking, for example, about the need to refresh and redevelop our SEND strategy for the next phase. And I think what's different and what was striking to us both is that we were having a conversation about that before we'd even really framed any work about it, so that we can, I think, get to a point where we're much, much earlier just starting to think about, okay, if we're coming to this and we'd like to do this piece of work together, how do we do that in co-production? And that again feels like we're getting, it's just much more impactful when we do the work that way. And I think the all age autism strategy sort of paved that way for us in a way.
I was just about to think about that, because we did this, it took a long time, didn't it? And I think one of the things that we have struggled with for a long time, and it's still a difficult part of the conversation, is the knowledge as a parent, as a family, that to do a piece of work like that well takes far longer than anybody ever anticipates. And of course, from a system perspective, you've got all of these deadlines, haven't you?
Well, there's also a sense of urgency. So I hold and feel a sense of urgency all the time to make improvement, and to, it's always it's constant. I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I think, oh, that's finished then. There's always something to respond to and to be able to learn from and to improve. And I think, when you're thinking in those terms, a temptation is to just do things more quickly. But the thing that we really learn, and actually from my perspective, it was my colleague Hayley Connor that really brought this this thinking forward, was that actually, no, in order to be able to do this well, the process that we adopt and the way in which we do it is actually going to be the key to its success. And therefore, taking time to get to that place makes a huge difference. And that, of course, is what Family Voice advocate for, and have been for a long time, actually. And I think that we've just, feels like we've got ourselves into a place now where we've got some fantastic examples of what goes well when you do it that way.
And I think the autism strategy work was really interesting, because what we ended up with was very different to what initially had been thought. Really, really different. And it was really because as a team, we decided to put first the feedback from families and from autistic people. And I think bringing in the independence of London South Bank University to do some analysis on that gave that feedback a little bit more credibility, the analysis. And then we had those, so we did some work following that big consultation. And then we had those workshops. And we thought, I think as a team, we had differences of opinion, but we largely thought, okay, we know roughly where we're going. And we thought that it would be almost a checking in and it's fine. And actually, we came away from those workshops and went, oh, actually, we've got to take it in a different direction. But what we've ended up with is, I think, something that now can be implemented in a way that makes sense, that is concrete. And one of the things that was really beautiful from our perspective is we had those, what do we hope, what are we aiming to achieve in the first year? And rather than being this big fluffy vision that is so far from the now, it's actually been broken down into, this is real and this is something we absolutely must work towards, and this is how we're going to do that. And all of that has come from those conversations with autistic people. We had the most challenging conversations, didn't we, around the whole question of diagnosis?
Yes, I mean, and I think we probably all went into those thinking that we would expect to have those types of conversations, and allowing the space and time for that was the real key.
Exactly.
And I think that coming through that work and to be able to now have a set of really tangible, measurable activities and actions for this year in the context of a longer term set of vision and sort of goals and ambitions, now really means that we're able to make the steps that we need to be able to create the change that we all require, so all the time, thinking about trying to create impact. I mean, that's the reason why and positive impact, that's the reason why we all come to this work from a local authority perspective, and why we do this work in partnership. But I think that there's a lot to learn from the way in which we conducted that piece of work, and we want to continue to sort of grow and enhance our experience around that. And so there's always more that you can learn, but using that now as a sort of a model to move forward.
And I think that we've certainly seen, I think, the impact of that in other pieces of work at all kinds of levels, some really small things where, we start something, we say, well, let's get something done by, 6 weeks from now. And then 3 weeks in, you kind of go, yeah, but if we carry on there, what we're going to end up with isn't going to have the impact. So let's step back, pause and say, okay, so it's a longer piece of work, but that is, and again, it's deciding what impact do we want and how we're going to do it in a really concrete way that feels like we're doing more than talk.
And it feels important also to recognise that there are things, particularly for individual families and for individual children, young people, that do require our quick and urgent attention. So all the time there is a balance between the here and now and what needs to be done, and of course our work and our thinking to sort of in these longer term frames. So I think for us it's important that we hold both of those things, so that we're not that we're taking the right approach, I suppose. I'm really
pleased you said that, because you're right. There's that one piece of work where you're looking to the future and saying, what do we want the system to look like eventually? And then at the same time, what is life like for families now? And actually, if you've got a child who's 15, they don't have 5 years to wait for you to bring us the wonderful system, do they? And we know, and I think it's really important for me to say here, so a conversation like this, for me, it's important that it's positive and that it's looking forward. But I also know that there are going to be parents going, why are you not shouting at her more? Why are you not telling her that things are awful? And it is really important that we recognise that the lived experience of many families is awful at the moment. Obviously, it's not everybody. There are some good things that happen, but there are some really, really, a Family Voice, we're on the receiving end of some very, very difficult stories to hear. And it kind of feels like this is a good place to open that conversation. I hate this phrase, but it's in the parent carer forum world all over the place. Can't tell you why I hate it. I just don't like it. But we have a remit to be a critical friend.
Yes, you do. Yes.
And I suppose, one of the things we talked about, how could we talk about this? And I have no idea what you're going to say here, but I wondered, what has been the most challenging moment in the relationship between Family Voice and Surrey County Council in the last year or 18 months?
Well, I can. There were quite a number of things that will come to mind. You did something particular though. You took a particular approach to something actually in terms of sharing a story with us about an experience for a young person. And what you did was you recorded that for us to be able to hear it in the family's own words. And that for me was a really important. Yeah, that was really difficult. It was really difficult to hear, and it was really important. And so there are lots of things actually where you are bringing information, which is difficult to hear, and also challenging. About are we focused on the right priorities at this time and the right things at this time. So those things, because of course, how can you fail to hear that as a human, as well as an employee and somebody with responsibility and accountability for leading in this area without feeling that. So I guess for me, if I were to talk about a challenging moment, that is one that really comes very clearly to my mind. But I would want to put that in the context of it's a critical friend, and I would like to say as well, I think it's importantly constructive, because it helps us to go forward, and that's the real key. Sometimes, shouting and being angry on its own doesn't actually provide the information or the way in which we can really learn and be able to move forward with that. And that's not to say that Family Voice aren't, as a collective, aren't assertive when they need to be about those things, and and that was right and proper. That's right and proper. And actually, so are our children and our young people through their groups as well. And they will tell us, as you do, when you did that was really good. That works well. Do more of it. Or learn from that, or whatever. And so, in this way, the relationship, because it has to be a relationship in our partnership, but we're able to hold our own responsibilities and accountabilities and be able to put those forward in the kind of spaces that we've created together to do that. And we do have a partnership because of course the experiences are really about a local area coming together. So it is about schools and early years settings and FE colleges and health colleagues and all of the other people that are involved in this system. And it is therefore by its design complex, and families feel that more than most. And so we have to create the right spaces in which to be able to have the conversations. And you, of course, were able to come to the Select Committee recently and be able to give direct evidence and information as a witness in that committee process, which of course was really powerful and important. And that in itself has now sparked some activity. So that's another example, I think, of where Family Voice can be really heard, and it's important to be able to create those opportunities so that we can do the right work.
Thank you. It's really important, I think, for me to mention that we're not an advocacy service, are we? And what we do is best described, I think, as collective representation.
Yes.
And at the same time, every now and again, we hear a story that has got really stuck, or there are safeguarding concerns or something. And the one that you mentioned, I'd looked and I'd seen all of the signposting that could be done had been done, and it really felt very stuck. And there was an urgency and a specificity about that. And I remember I said, actually, can I have a year's worth of favours, please? And finding a meeting was difficult. And so I thought, actually, do you know what? I'm going to tell you the story, because before it came to you, it came to me. And the emotions that you describe are ones that we feel at Family Voice all the time, because we hear so many stories. I have to say I was really grateful for the response that I got, but it's also not the way that we can work day to day, because we are a teeny tiny group and it's important that we give the collective experience, isn't it?
It's really important, and I think I think that balance is held really well. So essentially what you were doing for us there was sort of illustrating, and sometimes on individual matters, we might have a difference of opinion because our experiences might be different, but it's really important to get that focus and leave room for there being something that we've missed and not done well enough, and to be able to respond to that and learn from that. But I think that you know, by you being able to bring those themes to the fore and to be able to think about it in those ways, actually, of course, brings benefit to the more than one family, which of course is what we want to do all the time.
That's the point, isn't it?
We're trying to impact, and it would be much harder to do one by one. You know, so it is important that we sort of take that sort of thematic approach, but occasionally, and that's what you did on this occasion, is through the lens of one situation, you're able to highlight the sorts of work that you want to have a conversation about, that you want us to be engaged in, and that's really the trigger.
And I think that's what that's what really I wanted to highlight in that circumstance. It was illustrative of a number of issues that we were hearing more broadly. One of the things, I'm looking at my clock. So one of the things I'm absolutely thrilled about is that we actually finally this year managed to get together, and we've signed an agreement for 3 years, haven't we?
We have,
which is, I think, most importantly, it describes how we work together. But I have to say, you know, it's also really it's crucial that there's some funding attached to that. And I thought it was worth just having a quick chat about that, because we do have quite a number of parents who might be hesitant about joining us as full members because they see us financially attached to Surrey County Council, or they will say, well, you know, how can you be our representative? How can you be independent if you are funded by Surrey? And I thought this was a nice space to get your perspective on that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it is important that it's, I guess, a contractual relationship, because we are actually contracting that level of independence in a way, and objectivity, and it really won't help. It won't help us to do the work if it's anything other than that. I already have access to lots and lots of people that will tell me something about what we think as a local authority, you know, we're doing, and that's not the role that we have here. It was important for us to put this on a firm footing and a longer term footing to enable Family Voice to do the work and plan for the work over a longer period, because it's really difficult if you're in a constant cycle of sort of year by year, which is where we've been. Yeah. So the contract gives us now some longevity, some certainty about the way in which we'll do the work together. And I do describe it as a partnership and a collaboration, because you have to build a relationship in that sense to do this work. The local area is a partnership across all of our agencies and all of our partners, and of course Family Voice as the Parent Care Forum. But for me, it's vital and important that the integrity that is preserved, you know, and that view from Family Voice that comes forward isn't something which is, you know, the view of the local authority, but it is faithfully representing families, and that you're able to share those experiences with us, but also importantly, work on the things with us that make a difference. So, you know, hearing is one thing, but then it's what you do with that that's really key, and that's the thing that will make the difference ultimately.
And I'm hopeful that we've adopted a much more project-based approach, and quite a lot of the bits that we find ourselves wanting to focus on is, I suppose it fits under that banner of transparency or information and communication. And, you know, one of the pieces of work that we're about to start with a number of people across, particularly social care, is what actually is the offer for children with disabilities in social care, because it's very confusing and very confused. And when you speak to people in the system, often they can't give you a clear idea. So actually we thought, well, why don't we work together and produce something that both the system and families can have much clearer. So we tend to start from what is it that we understand, and what is it that parents understand and that professionals understand. And when you ask that question, very quickly you realize that it very rarely matches up very well. And so one of the things that is a joy to do in a way, because you get a fairly immediate impact, is if we can bring that together and help each party understand the other's perspective, then you actually get a much more holistic view of what's actually happening. And that then allows you that springboard to make the changes that might be necessary.
It absolutely does. And I think that having that forward work program, if you like, which we can review and adapt as necessary, depending on, you know, new issues that perhaps coming up that we didn't foresee, or perhaps they reprioritize. But that gives us the ability to do this in a really structured way now over a period of time. And I think, you know, that the importance of the local offer and being able to describe clearly what the offer is and how to get the right help and support at the right time. Because for most families in Surrey, actually, they are not at the most complex end of need. And so we constantly need to think about where the breadth of our work, you know, should be, and the full breadth of our work, and then being able to describe that in terms so that everybody is able to access at the right time the help and support that they need. You know, it is really important. So I think, you know, for me, the new arrangements, the new contractual arrangements that we've put in place enables us to now really get stuck into that work, rather than focusing endlessly on what's the next, you know, contract for the next year gonna look and feel like. And in a way, you know, it helps us to sort of move past that bit of administration in a way to the real work.
And I have to say, you know, as a result, in part of that work that we've done together, I'm really pleased. We've been struggling to get the right bits of pictures and stuff to put on our website, so it hasn't actually come out officially, but we were really, really pleased that the National Lottery, and we made an application for funding from them, and they have given us 5 years worth of funding.
Oh wow, brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
It's wonderful. It gives us that little bit of extra independent funding, which is good for any organisation, I think. But one of the reasons that we got that far was we were able to demonstrate that we had a strong working relationship with you, and all it comes down to how do you put together a good working relationship with strong challenge, and it's daily. It's a bit of a tricky one sometimes, isn't it? But I think it works, and at the moment we do feel like the balance is hopefully reasonably good, and that you feel I'm a pain in your backside without wanting to get rid of me completely.
I don't think I could ever use those words, but yeah, you might want me to.
Thorn in your side, maybe. We're very much running out of time, but I know that we were hoping to, I suppose, finish on thinking about what's next. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, that probably the biggest piece of work strategically that we need to start, and we have started thinking about, is what this new SEND strategy. So we had a SEND strategy, which often gets lost, doesn't it? We don't really know where it is and what it is. We've done a really good piece of work, I think, to produce an easy read version. And one of my first conversations with Mary, who's leading kind of the first conversations have been there, I've said, can we use easy language, please? Because if we can formulate it in language that we all understand, then actually we're going to be at the core of what we want to achieve. And so we're already beginning to have conversations about what we do and what we want to achieve. But much of it doesn't feel like it's written already. It feels like it's something we want to embark on together.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So we had our current strategy ran from 2019 through to 2022, and so we're sort of turning our minds now to the fact that next year is 2022, and we really need to think about making sure we're really clear about what the last strategy delivered, and then really importantly focused on what we need to do next. Whilst we took a sort of consultative approach to the last strategy, and we worked with the partnership perhaps more closely on it, it wasn't co-produced in the same way as I think we would want to co-produce this now.
I'd agree with that.
We've put it forward as a really important piece of work for us to do, because it frames the whole of the work that we're doing around SEN. That's what it will do. It will set out clearly our ambition. It will set out clearly the areas that we need to focus on. And then, as you've described in the all age autism, you know, what we're going to do in the next year. You know, what does year 1 look like, and then we move on from there. So so we want to take a different approach to the way that we're going to do this. That's why we've sort of started the early conversations, and then we'll start to sort of begin to the process of sort of forming that as a piece of work to do in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and I know one of the big conversations almost starts with, we've been talking about what is life like now, which is, it's something that we just need to repeat, don't we, all the time. And I would certainly urge anybody who's watching us today to, first of all, join us if you haven't already, because why on earth not? We are a delightful bunch. And mostly tell us your stories, and we need to hear the good, the bad. We need to hear the stories. If you think that there's something that's a little bit kooky, and maybe school haven't really identified that yet, or is your child on SEND support, or are they in the process of getting an EHCP? Are they in mainstream? Are they in special school? Wherever your child is, and we know that we've got a group of children who are finding school attendance very, very difficult. And we know that we've got parents with amazing kind of thoughts about what would help their children. All of those things are going to help shape what that strategy looks like, aren't they, Liz?
They are.
She says they are, aren't they?
No, they absolutely are. They absolutely are. It'll be the bedrock of our work. So,
but I think
really
the important message that is actually, if we don't hear those stories in a way that can be presented to people like Liz, then they go into a void, and they can't then influence that strategy. And as much as, you know, at Family Voice, we keep an eye on a lot of Facebook groups, and we hear a lot of the noise that's going on. We can only do so much with noise. We obviously have to keep people's confidentiality. If you tell us your story, you can tell us anonymously. But if we have a body of stories, that allows us to go in with the big guns.
Well, I mean, for me, the really important part that Family Voice bring is that breadth of experience.
Yeah.
And so the broader the base, the better. So I would encourage people to make contact with you.
Absolutely. And I think it's, you know, as much as it is really important to know where improvements need to be made, it's also, I heard 2 stories, Liz, this in the last couple of weeks that I just loved. You may have heard them, you possibly have, because we've spoken recently. But I think it's worth sharing. I heard from just the most amazing mum of a really little one who, in response to, I asked if people had stories of good inclusion. And she spoke of a really large nursery who were putting in place really specific things. And they had, you know, things like plate separators, so that this little boy could eat without his food touching, because and all of the staff had done some Makaton training, the sign language, and they were including him in lunch and helping him. He'd been given extra time for transitions. All of these very, very specific strategies that, as parent carers, we all know are the obvious things to do, and many of us bang our heads against the wall saying, this is not difficult, why are you not doing this? But to be able to highlight that and say to other nurseries, look, if they can do it, what's stopping you? And let's answer that question. And then the other one was a story that we heard through a parent from a sibling, a sister. So her brother is in a special school, has considerable needs, and her school has just opened like a unit, a secondary school. And she's coming home going, oh, mommy, you know those kids that I've told you are on the autistic spectrum? They've got somewhere safe to go. And it just feels so lovely. And I think those are the stories that we need to hear as much as the difficult ones, because those are the places where we can make sure the system improves for all children.
It undoubtedly will. And if I were to leave with one thought, I suppose, is that, you know, we have to have hope. We have to build on what works and from strength, but also in the sure knowledge that we're not doing all the right things for all the families here in Surrey yet, and so there's lots more for us to do. You know, we're still on that sort of journey of getting to the place that we need to be. We know that. So whenever we're expressing something that you know, is because actually it's a better experience and a good and a positive thing. It's also with the knowledge in mind that actually there's more to do for other families and children that perhaps not in that space yet. But I do firmly believe that we're all here simply to try and move to that place as quickly as we can get there, and the collaboration and the work that we'll do together will help us with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. That feels like a brilliant place to end. And I will just say that I, as many of my members know, I do a Facebook Live usually once a week, and an open invitation to you and your colleagues to come and join me for a chat whenever you would like, or whenever you've got something to either ask parents or tell them. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to say bye-bye and do my gubbins of pressing stop everywhere.
Thank you.
Bye.